Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today, I'm super excited to welcome Rich Goldsmith onto the podcast. Rich is co-founder of MOJU, along with his best mate, Charlie. I absolutely love MOJU. The ginger shots are so delicious. And MOJU really have kind of pioneered and disrupted the smoothie and juice category. The highest cash rate of sale in juices and smoothies, highest rate of sale in food to go, the #1 brand in functional shots with 48% market share. And they're delivering 84% of that growth. They sold 10 million shots in 2021. That's one every 3 seconds. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Absolutely love the brand you've built, Rich, and super excited to have you on, mate. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Dan. Yeah, really good to be here. Always good to do some confessions with the Pope on a Tuesday.
Exactly. So where I want to start is outside looking in, and I've met yourself and I've met Charlie. I feel like there is this almost mojo within MOJU, right? And I think it stems from your relationship with your co-founder, Charlie. And I would love to kind of use this as a launch pad to kind of start this conversation. So, I mean, for me, the kind of health category, say 2015, it was quite alienating. It was kind of people like dipped top to toe in Sweaty Betty, militantly scoffing kind of, 5-6 meals a day. And in some respects, I feel like you've kind of done what Joe Wicks did to like personal training in terms of making it fun and accessible. You've brought that to like the juice category, and it's fun. There's almost as I said, mojo in the MOJU. But where I really want to start is how this kind of manifested. And I think understanding your relationship with Charlie is super important. So could you explain or give some color to listeners, like the first day you met Charlie, where was that, and kind of what that felt like?
Yes, for sure. I mean, the reference to Joe Wicks is, massive props to him, but also I'm a massive fan of what he's done actually, and knowing by a couple of loose connections, I know he's a really good dude as well, and he does everything like genuinely because he really cares. And so that reference is actually a really good one, because we really do believe that's how we operate as well, is try to operate from a real place from care and looking after people, really. So I mean, to even be mentioned in the same sentence is pretty awesome. But in terms of Charlie and I, so yeah, we met back at university with different degrees. Charlie did business management, I did engineering. I actually did a form of engineering called motorsport engineering, which is pretty specialist, with the hope to go into F1 one day. Turns out I was a terrible engineer, but enjoyed it nonetheless, enjoyed the course. It was super practical in elements. So, and then really enjoyed our time at uni, and met Charlie actually quite late. Met through a love of surfing. We were the only two mad enough to be jumping in a car as often as we could to get down to the West Coast. Turns out Oxford's the most landlocked city in the country, so it's a really crap idea to go there for uni, given that we were sort of these classic British surfers, all the gear, literally no idea, still are today. And actually during that time, and this was a long time ago now, we always talked about doing something together. There was just this mutual understanding between us, and this kind of relationship where we shared we had very similar values, and we shared a very similar outlook on life. We've come from quite different backgrounds and we operate in a very different way, but that shared value set and the shared ambition, I think has really been the core to our relationship, as I'm sure it is with a lot of successful sort of founder relationships, which can get super strained, and there's ups and downs to the founder relationship, and there's advantages to being in a pair and disadvantages as well. So but in terms of that, kind of the genesis of our story started there, and then we went into the city. A bit of a classic, it's a bit of an old trope now really, boring to talk about. You know, we were lucky enough to go through graduate schemes, then into sort of corporate jobs, but actually it formed, that was real proving ground for us in terms of, or except a place to learn for a start commercially, you know, how to operate in that environment. But it also informed what we wanted to do in the rest of our life, which was not that. And it told us, showed us a way of how we didn't want to operate a business. But that's as much the origin story for MOJU as it is the product, because we decided we wanted to do something together, build an amazing company, awesome company that we would want to work in, that other people would want to work in. And as I say, our experiences there shaped what MOJU is today. And in the same way, it kind of comes back to your point about what we saw in the market. So we were buying into these products of cold pressed juice and shots, and you know, we were buying them at local juice bars, and they were super expensive, and we could barely afford to do that. But they were really functional. They actually supported what we were up to, our lifestyles. But we weren't reading Goop at a weekend and doing yoga 7 times a week. So for us, it actually shaped what MOJU was about, which was take these products that have traditionally been for are exclusive and been for a small audience, and say, how do we actually build something that lots of people can engage with and can be really accessible? So, and there's a number of aspects to that: price, the brand itself, to your point, how it engages with the consumer, how it looks, feels. And so we wanted to do away with all these wellness cliches and just create a fun, engaging, energetic brand that's really proactive as well, that kind of supports an active lifestyle. So it's not like a passive health brand, and do it in a very different way from what's come before. More, I would say, actually taking kind of inspiration more from a Red Bull than you would be from, as I say, the Goops of this world, or some of these very passive, health brands that have come before that didn't talk in an energetic way, didn't kind of promote an active lifestyle in any way. So that was kind of the origin story.
And so just to go back, you said, Charlie and I had very similar values from the outset. What were some of those values?
I think they still stand really true today. So integrity is almost probably the biggest shared between us, which is we've always wanted to do things the right way. And that's by no means saying that others do it in a different way. It's just that featured very high up the list. And that meant we were willing to do some things and not other things to get along. And it also informed how the kind of business that we wanted to build, how we were going to finance the business, how quickly we wanted to grow, what we were trying to create. This wasn't a build it and flip it enterprise. It was let's build something awesome. It's going to take time. It's not something we necessarily would see ourselves running in 30 years' time, but let's build something awesome and see where it takes us.
And I suppose going into this, I'm trying to dig into is almost the genesis of the fun bit within like having fun in a healthy way, and kind of that's, I feel like, what Joe Wicks has done. Would you say like the surfing was there that came through, or was it going out and getting pissed at uni? Like, or was it both? Where did the sort of the fun element come from within yours and Charlie's relationship, which then kind of filled into MOJU?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. It's a good question because as much about how we like to, we're just very normal people, and for our at the time we were normal people who like to go to festivals, music festivals, like to head out to the odd club at the weekend, but also like to get stuck into half marathons or longer swims, or I've never actually done a triathlon, but both of us were active, and surfing as well, and that type of stuff. So it really came from how do you supplement your lifestyle to continue doing that stuff whilst also having some fun as well. So it was like the balance was being struck. You know, we were already identifying that balance is an important thing, and it continues to be that way here. So, you know, you're not, we don't bang on and harp on about a very strict regimen around health and wellness, and you can't go and have fun. So that's one part. And then I think it's also just at times it's felt not fun at all, the journey, because the entrepreneurial journey, and I've inverted commas because people kind of overuse, I don't like to be described as an entrepreneur per se, but it's like, because it can be a bit cliched, but it is a roller coaster, and you are going to enjoy it and you're not going to enjoy it at some points, and it's not always fun. But I think that was always something that we wanted to, a bit like a good parent protects their kids from the tough times, you know, as I see it. It was the same way with the team. We always tried to protect them from the pain and the less fun stuff, and made sure that we were in the same way as maybe a parent, united front, always together, you know, very, very aligned. And as I say, protected the team from some of the real hard bits and let them enjoy what they're doing, because people join these businesses, younger businesses, to ultimately enjoy their, you know, to be really challenged and pushed, but also to have fun as well. And we recognize that. And again, we came from backgrounds where fun was not even on the register, you know, really.
Yeah, no. So yeah, go for it.
No, just because you're driven by, you know, the expectations are different, and you're driven by something entirely different when you're operating in sort of more corporate, particularly city type environments, professional services. It's a very different beast.
And that's what I was just going to say then is I always, I've said this numerous times on this podcast, is I always say to myself each day, I've like got it written down, it's like, how will you have fun today? Because the fun can almost take the sting out of the stress and the challenge, and it can sort of bring you back down or pull you back down to reality. And it could be, I mean, it could literally be something as simple as like, you know, like even yesterday I was just having a laugh with Ollie, our other sales guy in the office. It's like those little things, but if you do them every day, they compound, and it keeps the journey fun.
Really meaningful. Yeah.
to the festivals piece, could you describe the first festival you did, and was that literally about, you know, we're going to go and have some fun at festival, sell some shots? I think I've heard you reference it like bringing people back from the dead, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
Where was the first festival?
It was actually, for those that remember it, it was I don't even know if it's still operating today, but Gotwood up in Anglesey.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, it was quite a small festival. We just went up there to enjoy it, but then at the same time we take business quite seriously. Like, we take the act of like building this business, we really take seriously. And I kind of come on to how we kind of view it in that way, because it's actually for us the way we've always is, we're all incredibly, the majority of us, me included, the majority of your listeners are incredibly privileged, because you've generally got optionality. If it doesn't work out, you can go and do something else. You've got a university degree to fall back on. You've got people you know that you can. We're all incredibly privileged, and some people don't have that. But the trick, I think, for us has been, how do you give yourself no optionality, despite the fact you already have it? So how do you trick your mind into thinking this is, make it work, or there's no other option? And that's how we've done almost. I don't know how we've done it, and I wouldn't be able to unbox that for you today, but that's kind of what we've pushed ourselves into. We can't let this thing not work. So even when it came to the early festivals, you know, we were enjoying ourselves, but at the same time, when people were coming back to their tents at 2-3 in the morning, we were there with our little 3-wheeler van with a cool box, selling selling shots. So it was like, it was still that graft and that sort of hustle was there. 2, 3 in the morning when we could have gone to bed because we've had fun that night as well. Then we could have gone to bed, but we were still out doing our thing. And I think that's the same thing exists today. There is no other option but to make MOJU, help it realize what it's capable of doing, and that is go for it.
No, it's so true. And I think to your point about this optionality, like, look, you go to these events, and I was born with a silver spoon up my arse, but most people in the FMCG challenger brand space, we're all very fortunate, very, very fortunate. Most go to like good schools, good universities, and as you say, you can, you've got something to fall back on. But I think your point about I've got to make this work, and I interviewed Jimmy from Jimmy's Iced Coffee the other week, and he was like, he talked about having to ditch like a shitload of his like 1 liter tubs. He's like, I do not care. Like, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to bludgeon my way through this and not give myself any other option. And this is quite morbid, but I listened to a podcast actually this morning on the way down here. And the guy was saying, what would you do if you had a gun to your head? And it's like, it cuts out that optionality and just forces you into a place of like, this has to work. And I feel, I love what you've said there about that, about, you can have fun, and that's almost the mo, if you want to call it that. But then the Jew is like, we're serious, we're integral, and this has to work. I absolutely love that. I think listeners can take so much from that, because I think if you just are going, just drive, and not balancing it with fun, then it just becomes, you need the balance of both.
And you chase, and if the mo can either mean fun, or it can also mean almost because of that mojo, that feel good. It's got to make you feel good about what you're doing, and building a business has got to make you feel good about how you're building it, and that can be extrinsic. So it can be people, for both Charlie and I, it's important that people regard us. They regard us for being good people who have built something in the right way. It's important to us. And yes, that's very extrinsic, and maybe you shouldn't need that validation, but it's still important to us. And so that also drives how you build the business. As I say, what listings you're going for and when, are you willing to push back against, you finance the business and you've got slightly aggressive financial partners who want to push you to do certain things, but you actually push back and say, no, it's not the right thing for the brand. This is going to take time. It's about feeling good about how you're building the brand as well, and the journey you're on, and being self-aware enough that you know what that is for you and what it means to you, because you're the one driving this thing, and it's not a short-term play. It's going to take, it's a cliche, but it's broadly true. In food and beverage, to build a brand, it's going to take you 10 years.
Sure. People
want to come in, do a 2-year journey and think they've built something, but our experience is we're 7 years in. We've now got a load of momentum, and we kind of hit that. We've gone through that tipping point now, and it's amazing fun from this point forward. We've got an amazing team. We're building on something. We're more established, and it's awesome, but it takes time to get there. And that is one thing that, I can only encourage people to do, which is, as I said, get your head down, work super, just really focus on what it is you want to achieve, and be very aware about the type of business you want to build and how you're going to build it, because there's a lot of factors that can change that. And as I say, that could be the way it's being funded, or the partners you're working with, et cetera, et cetera.
That's brilliant. And what you said there, which I think it's a great treasure chest, I suppose, of exploration for listeners. So you said potentially pushing back on either financial investors or other stakeholders who, want things moving in a certain way, whereas you as a founder have to almost be the bulwark against your brand to defend that. Lots of listeners will be trying to raise money or have big investors on board who may be trying to push them in a direction. What advice, like how do you and Charlie navigate those conversations and say, look, no, this is what we're doing? I'd love you to speak to that.
Yeah, I would probably, if another perspective or way of looking at it is, at what point do you bring someone into your business? Because broadly, again, it's a very expensive game, basically, food and beverage. To build a brand, it takes a lot of capital, takes a lot of money to do that. There are the rare cases where people do it over a longer period of time, and it will take longer, and they do it more organically. And there's some brilliant examples of that, but they're few and far between. Then you get into beverage, and it's a whole different ballgame, because beverage is just expensive, you know, really expensive. And then you get into chilled beverage, and it's a whole different layer again. So
yeah,
despite all of that, we've actually been we've made capital work really hard for us. And again, it's probably through being quite diligent with where we're spending and how we're building the brand. But coming back to your original question, you can actually approach it from a slightly different perspective of, before you even get people who are basically asking you to build your brand in a certain way, or to launch a certain line of products or whatever it may be, you need to be really clear on how you're going to finance the business, and who you're going to take money from, because that will influence, it changes the game, it changes the path you take, it can influence lots of decisions. From that very point, it can be the catalyst. You know, if you, for example, bring in a very financial investor who's going to be all over you, you know, private equity too early, they also want to keep putting money into you because they need to deploy their fund into you, it's going to change the game for you. More often than not. And you've seen a lot of businesses go to the wall early because they've had too much money too soon. So coming back to the original point is, be very mindful of when you bring that type of investor in. You need to have a real solid base. You have to have built the team, and you have to have a very clear sense of where the direction of the business is going. And then you need to heavily diligence the investor partners you're bringing on to understand they're right for you.
It's so interesting. So you almost, we'll go on to your kind of engineering background, which you briefly talked upon, but it feels like you've almost reverse engineered it. So you've said, so, you know, yourself and Charlie have said, like, we want to get here. This is kind of where we want to go. Which investors, you know, line up to that vision versus say, okay, we just need shitloads of money. Like, you can come on board. Do you see what I mean? Would you say that's true?
Yeah. And again, some luck, some judgment in there. I'm not going to say it's easier to rationalize it, post-rationalize it now that we've done an amazing job at it, but because we've made some missteps as well. And but certainly, yeah, we more reverse engineered it. And I spent, you know, nearly 4 years or so in investment banking. After leaving uni, I did the management graduate scheme with Airbus, and then moved from Airbus, which is the world's largest plane manufacturer, then moved into an investment banking role for 4 years. So I was familiar with stuff in that world and kind of knew what we wanted. So that kind of informed things. But yeah, I think you have to be really, really clear, because there is also, I see often with smaller brands, I often see this tension between wanting to build something, not being completely clear on actually what it's going to take, and then maybe taking investment from people that it doesn't actually match up with the ambitions of the founder or where they want to take the business. Do you want to be an international brand? You might not want to be. You might want to be an amazing artisanal craft producer of something, and that often doesn't match venture capital funding. Just doesn't, because funding, venture capital and private equity, they are looking for certain returns, right? So then you can look at, but that's where we're incredibly fortunate in the UK, because you've got SEIS and EIS, you've got a lot of money and capital within the angel community in the UK. And there's a lot of brilliant ones out there who are simply saying, I believe in you. And this was our angels to a T. They were like, we get what you're trying to do here. I think we get what you're trying to do. It kind of seems quite out there, but we can see there's a massive opportunity, big addressable market. It's going to be tough, guys. We're going into juices and smoothies. There's a couple of big brands in there, but they did believe, and I'll always give credit to them for jumping on the journey. But then they left us to it. They said, we fulfilled our side of the the deal, which kept them up to date, you know, kept them informed about stuff if we needed to. But beyond that, they weren't asking for, we need to see your financials every month. That would have been a massive burden and would have slowed us down. So, and they also weren't chucking, you know, maybe you should do this or maybe you should do this, because again, the founder should understand their category better than anyone. They should understand the journey that they're on better than anyone. So very few angels can actually, you know, provide much on the strategic side, really. There's very few strategic investors out there, despite the fact that everyone purports to be. So, but there are of course a few, and it can be really helpful. But yeah.
And no, I think there's so much for listeners in this, because I think the first thing is, you know, people see on LinkedIn or wherever social media is, oh, we've raised this money. It's almost like it's that validation piece. And what you've said there, it's very self-aware of what you said, of just actually look internally, like what do you actually want to build within 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, whatever, and then reverse engineer that back. Because I think people can get pulled into this sort of vortex of like, I need to get investment, and actually that's not always the best thing. It can stifle growth because you've got more people to answer for. I love that, Rich. And are your investors, have they come from food and drink background, or are they kind of just completely different out of interest?
Our early, it's changed over time, because our early stage guys, there are a couple who were from industry but weren't in the brand space. Actually, they're more white label, but understood food, and you know, understood how the relationships tend to work with the customers and things like that, in terms of the buyers and buying teams and that sort of stuff. And then there were a few financial investors, you know, what I'd class as, you know, more financial investors, which are guys who've worked at banks or whatever. And again, it's a privileged thing to be able to, you've at least got a network enough that you can reach out to people or be introduced to people. And that's something that we feel, you know, very fortunate for, and something that is something that is an immediate, you know, gives you this kind of immediate ability to take a step forward where others might be really struggling to secure that. So we were really, really fortunate there. And then over time, we've the shareholder base has sort of changed a little bit, but until we partnered with the ventures arm, so the corporate venture arm of Danone last year, and they are a standalone venture capital business, basically, based in New York, with a team in Europe as well. And they invest across a number of different businesses, but they've got an amazing portfolio of companies. We were their first UK investment, but they were, of course, a very, very different proposition, because that's what people would term as an institutional investor. So by that, they mean it's not an individual, you know, it's actually a corporate entity that's investing. And therefore, but it was the right time for us. The business we'd taken it to a point where actually we needed to further double down on investment from a category perspective, because we are leading this category, and it's very challenging building a category from scratch. But clearly the headroom is absolutely enormous, because we're making, it's undefined at the moment what that headroom is. So and actually the fundamentals as we stand today, you know, of what we're generating. So, you know, we'll do nigh on edging towards 20 million of retail sales this year, all pretty much from the UK. Yet we've got, as it stands today, household penetration of 2%. So you can see what the headroom is there. So the fundamentals are there, but it was the right time to bring someone in. And that comes back to my earlier point, to take, you know, the very fact that we got corporate venture in, which is incredibly, these guys obviously know, you know, they're not a financial private equity investor, for example. They really understand FMCG. They've got their strengths. So it was no mean feat partnering with those guys, but they're a brilliant fit for us. They operate in a way that, you know, completely resonates with us. They're really good people doing things in the right way. They're one of the, if the listeners aren't so familiar with Danone, they're pretty much the OG of ESG. So in big food, like they've been talking about that since the mid-60s. And they do things they try to do things in the right way, and the people are good people, and that meant a lot to us. You know, partnering with that type of investor was important, and they shared a very similar outlook on things, and they were in it for the journey, you know, which is what it's about.
No, I love it. And just to sidestep here, because I'm kind of following my own curiosity, but what's some of the best pieces of advice they've imparted on you now since you've done this Danone investment, which has like almost propelling you forward in the next stage of your journey?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it probably isn't what I would have first assumed, or maybe you or listeners would first assume, because you would think that having a FMCG heavyweight as a shareholder would, you know, they'd give you immediate access to things, or you would have, you know, distribution just turned on like that. And that's just not the case at all, particularly not with the structure of how Danone Manifesto Ventures works, because it is quite distinct from the parent company. But what they do, so you don't get that turning on of distribution or anything, but then you wouldn't, you know, that's what we do really well. We do sales and marketing really, really well. Clearly those big, you know, the big businesses like that, what they do incredibly well is consumer insights. You know, they've obviously got, from a supply chain perspective, significant, you know, depth of expertise in supply chain, and that spans lots of different areas. So they've been great working with us on the ESG side. Again, let's call it sustainability. Nowadays, it's sort of the catch-all term, but whether it be on packaging, developing our packaging and improving that from an environmental perspective, whether it be sourcing, supporting us on our sourcing journey, as we sort of, again, this sort of resonates, I'm sure, with Manilife, and you guys have been there from day dot, you know, working closely from essentially, you know, farm to jar, and working with us on that side of things has been massive, because they've got all the resources in the world, and they've got all of the insights in the world, and it essentially helps us there. And they really help challenge us on that side of things as well, because they know they've got, as I say, they've got a huge portfolio of brands. They've got specific specialists in teams that we can be linked into, and it's really helped us on that side of things. So in terms of advice, I'd say it's more about the challenge that they give us on supply chain, improving supply chain, sourcing, transparency, that side of things, which has always been our ambition, and we've always been striving for, but they've just helped level us up on that side of things.
No, that's so interesting. And as you said it, that was not I just thought it was like, right, let's turn the distribution taps on.
Yeah.
But it's almost, I suppose, building the foundations, which then, you know, it's getting the concrete before you kind of build the big empire, I suppose. What I want to talk about now is I listened to a podcast called the Good Luck Podcast, and you talked about building culture, and you said something that really kind of struck a chord with me. You said it took us several years to get comfortable in our own skin. Now, I watched a video of you guys, I think it's you and Charlie launching into Waitrose. It's jokes. It's like, you know, you're in like I don't know what it is. It's a jokes video anyway. Go and listen, just go and find it on your Instagram. But
pineapple leggings, wasn't there?
Yeah, that was the pineapple leggings. It's hilarious. So talk about that. So cultures and hiring teams and building teams and creating your kind of unapologetic identity. Why did you feel uncomfortable in your skin originally? I'd love to know more about that.
Kind of, you're almost conditioned. It felt like we were almost conditioned to be a certain way, to go off. You know, you go through school. At school, there was no talk of creativity wasn't up the top of the agenda. It was, if you leave school, you're going to be a a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. It was professional services and kind of those traditional careers. And actually, I only realised once I did quite a practical engineering degree, I was actually quite creative. So I built, for my dissertation, I built a bamboo mountain bike. And through that process of actually building something and creating something, I realised I actually was, creative. And I believe everyone is creative. It's just what is your outlet and how does that manifest? But you're almost conditioned all the way through. Then you leave university, then it's this expectation around a graduate scheme. Then you go into a graduate scheme, then and as we did, you sort of move into corporate jobs. All the whilst you're wearing stuff that basically you don't necessarily feel comfortable in. You're talking in a certain way. I remember catching up on football stuff on a Sunday just so I could talk about something in the office on a Monday. I don't even really like football that much. It's all that stuff. You're behaving in a way that is not true to who you are. And I've seen it play out so often with friends, and, people who've joined MOJU as well have been, I think, they find it genuinely transformative how they can join a business and can literally be who they are. And that was huge for us. And that's getting comfortable. Plus we were on a journey of, I'm late 30s now. So started MOJU early 30s, and you're still maturing and finding out what you're about and who you're about, and that happens. That's a work in progress, isn't it? It continues for a long time, or for the whole of your life, really. But this kind of maturing, figuring out who you are, and it took us a few years, as you mentioned, it took us a few years to really understand what this business was about, what it stood for. That again, values are talked about a lot, but really, what are the values? But how do we actually live them every day, and what do they actually mean? But once we've got there, it almost starts to become more self-reinforcing. So now that you bring on brilliant people, and we really promote a sense of be who you are, turn up be what you want to be at work, dress how you want to dress. There is almost no expectation at all to dress a certain way. That comes from a personal thing of, I almost have an aversion, an allergy to dogma and to doing things how they're supposed to be done, or as they've always been done, or doing things in a way that doesn't necessarily speak to who you're about and what you do. So I think it's and how you like to do things. So it's really important we continue to promote that, and that therefore helps bring in more diversity. You get different opinions on things, different views. We all share a very collective ambition for things, and we're all, again, sits with people of integrity, respect. But then you can you don't have to fit a certain mold, and that comes back to my aversion, which was, I almost feel that you should be able to do whatever you want in life and don't have to look a certain way or dress a certain way. And that's where this competitor in me comes through, which is it was always, we're going to go and build something awesome. It's more awesome than anything that exists in the city, and it's going to be in the same way that so many amazing brands have been built. It's proving that you don't have to, in order to be successful, you don't have to work in the city, and you don't have to dress a certain way and talk a certain way. And does that make sense?
Oh, mate, completely. So lots of my mates from school, like my close mates, they're all in the city. And I actually went, I went to Leadenhall Market the other night, and obviously I was the only one in that wasn't in a bloody trench coat, with this bonnet slipped back. So I just felt so out of place. I was like, all these people are putting on this act in some respects. It's like I don't know, I can't really describe what it is, but what I love what you said there, you almost shred this corporate snakeskin in some respects. You and Charlie have gone to work on yourselves, kind of looking inwardly, finding out what your values are, and then you've managed to build MOJU out of that. So it's kind of started with yourself and Charlie, is what I'm kind of learning, and then you've been able to build this Well, yeah, just this brand from that. And I think people listening to this, there's definitely something in going in and just, as you say, almost being averse to the dogma of like, this is the way things should be done. I really, really, really love that. And I suppose on the values thing, like, look, this is something all guests who've built great brands have all got really pretty stringent and specific values. I don't know if you spoke to Jimmy, but he's got one, Yalla Habibi, which means like, let's go, darling. And I was like, that is the best thing I've ever heard. What are some of the values you've got at MOJU, and how do you manifest them within the team?
Yeah, it's one of how you live, and actually how you. So the way we regard values is actually they're more actions and behaviours than they are actually values. So how do you actually demonstrate them? I'll pull out a couple because we've got a few. Again, you can't have too many because it gets a bit unwieldy. But one is keep it real. So it's, obviously that speaks slightly to what we do on a product basis as well, because you've got, a real product. I mean, for those who haven't tried a MOJU shot, you'll know when you've tried a MOJU shot, it'll be a pretty memorable experience. And a lot of that comes from sort of the realness of the ingredients, to the point that, we own, I think it's something like 92% of our ingredients are pressed fresh in the factory every day. So, it's all about realness. And so that keep it real is about, remain humble, whether you're coming first place or last place, you always remain humble and about what we're doing. And it's also about straight talking as well. So in terms of straight talking, what we found is promoting and encouraging an environment of radical candor. And there is a brilliant book on radical candor. It was a phrase that was coined in Silicon Valley. I can't recall the author actually right now, but it's a great book. But it's essentially about caring deeply. And if you care deeply, you will give feedback, direct feedback to people in a constructive way. And so that's something that we really focus on. And again, we're not perfect at. It's always a work in progress. But it's been really fundamental to how we've built the business today and how it will continue to scale. Is how candid are you with the person sat next to you? How candid are you in meeting environments? How willing are people to step up and contribute in a meeting? Because there is no fear of judgment, and there's no idea is a stupid idea. So definitely that, and I'll get onto how we sort of embed them. And then another one would be probably act evergreen, and this is.
Sorry, say again. What was that?
Act evergreen. So it's right. Yeah. So it's more, and again, you'll notice that all of the values are kind of positioned as almost a proactive statement rather than loyalty or trust. It's more of a doing thing. So act evergreen is about building long and lasting relationships. So that comes back very much to, throughout this, we focused a lot on relationship and trying to make relationships as long-term as possible, and growing with people as well. I think that's really important. Is you're doing the right thing. If you're a scale-up brand or a startup brand, growing with your manufacturer, for example, growing with your customers, as they expand their footprint, for example, is a great mentality to have, and it allows you to build your businesses alongside each other, rather than the small guy going to the big guy and trying to work with the big guy. The big manufacturer has got no interest in working with the small guy. Go find another small guy who you think's got loads of potential and will, does things the right way, and build alongside them. And I've heard loads of stories of that, and it's been the same for us, where a brand because we're a co-manufactured product, has built alongside their co-manufacturer. They've not gone to a massive co-manufacturer and managed to achieve good pricing, good relationship off the bat. It just doesn't work like that, because generally the big manufacturer has got economies of scale to look after, and they've got no interest in modifying their processes for this small little brand with two ambitious but founders who come in and sort of knock on the door and say, do you want to work with us? We're going to be the next big thing in beverage. You'll be like, okay, cool, we've heard that 1,000 times. So building alongside, I think, is a really good tip. So yeah. No, but that would be Act Evergreen. So there's a couple, and then we've got a couple more. But the way we then embed them is incorporate them into so in terms of your coaching sessions. So everyone in the business has a coach essentially, which tends to be, for want of another way of describing it, would be your line manager. But as part of those coaching sessions, you are looking, on a quarterly basis, at the very least, you're looking at how have you demonstrated those values. Are you meeting them or exceeding them? And that is on a consistent basis. So we embed them that way. We've also got what we call Crew Champ. So the team's called our crew, spelled obviously CRU because it's MOJU, but that's the crew. You've got a Crew Champ on a monthly basis. So everyone in the crew is constantly on Slack, sort of shouting someone out for, they did this and this was demonstrating this value. And then at the end of the month, there's a little committee. So the committee's made up of the people who have won it previously. They then take all the votes and they look at they weight it themselves on, right, this person's demonstrated X, and then you win Crew Champ. You win 250 quid for the month to go and spend on sort of something that you're, a passion or whatever it may be. And then that kind of further reinforces the values because you're talking about them every single day. Rather than just slogans up on the wall, because it's just
no, mate. I love that because it can be a load of woo woo ha ha airy fairy bollocks, to be honest. But I think what you've said there is probably the best answer I've heard of actually implementing it on a day-to-day basis. Because as you say, each day compounds, and over time you build that evergreen brand. But you have to focus on the now and the day of implementing it and embedding it to build that. No, love that. And so where I want to go now actually is this product market fit piece. I know you referenced Silicon Valley just now with the Radical Calendar book, but I think you referenced this on the Screw It, Just Do It podcast, I hope.
Okay.
But you were talking about product market fit, and it's, I suppose for listeners, it's this kind of this point that everyone wants to get to with their brand, and it's when you've iterated the product numerous times. Consumers are like almost gagging for the product and willing to kind of tell all their friends. So it's almost this tipping point. Now, with you guys, you've basically created a new category and a brand new category with a brand new product and functional shots. How do you create product market fit for the consumers when there isn't really a market? I'd love you to speak to that, please.
Yeah, I mean, wow. And I think I say wow because how repeatable is that? I mean, probably not. How many multiple time founders do you see create something completely relatively novel? And don't get me wrong, no concept is truly novel because it's either it's modified on something that's come before, or it's in a different geography. So for us, there was some early movements in the US market that inspired us to kind of to launch, essentially look at shots and then launch shots. So that was I guess that's almost like first step, which is there a geography in which this product is working already, or showing signs of working, even if you're not that familiar with the geography? And I think this has played out a bunch of times. I think with Vita Coco, for example, in coconut water, I think the founder there took a trip to Brazil, I think, and saw coconut water quite prolifically sold across Brazil. And was like, there's nothing exists in the US. So you've got, probably quite a big audience there in the US for that, a very multicultural society in the US, etc. So I don't think it's that uncommon to find, and it's one way of doing it, which is find something that is not in your geography at the moment that is kind of performing. And that's the first step. Then for us, it was loads of naivety built into this, by the way, because we didn't know what we were doing. We came from outside of FMCG. We had no idea about, no idea about the fundamentals of food and beverage. Now, I know you've had a bunch of founders on here before who were seasoned, more seasoned and have done their hard yards in the industry. That comes with a massive benefit, but it comes with a significant downside, which I'm sure you touched on before. But if you are, it almost limits your thinking, because you are then constrained by all of that sunk cost that you've spent 15 years in a career. All of that investment you put into that career also means there's a certain way of thinking or a certain way of doing things. And this comes back to the dogma. So that is the downside. Whereas the upside of being completely naive to it is you probably do things that you couldn't rationalize on paper. You wouldn't be able to say that's necessarily a logical thing to us, but it seemed logical at the time. So for us, it was very much about in market and get the product into market, test it with consumers, go to festivals, go to trade shows, get in and sample the hell out of a Planet Organic, Whole Foods, all the stuff that Dan, inside and out. And really actually listen to the consumer as well. Don't pretend to listen to the consumer. Again, see this a bunch of times with certain brands and founders, is they don't actually want to listen. They're still trying to push something into market that they believe is going to be a massive success, or they believe consumers love. But but you've still got to be resolute about your concept as well, and have faith in what you're doing, because to your point, there wasn't really a market for MOJU, but you still have to invest time in that and have faith in what you're doing, because there will be a million naysayers as well. Investment community will be naysayers, family and friends will be, they'll think it won't work for whatever reasons, but for a number of reasons. But yeah, invest and have faith. But the balance, I think where it's reasonable to have faith, and where you can really be resolute, is look at the signals. So the fundamentals, where you're selling. So you're in a Planet Organic or in a Whole Foods, which of course it's an early adopter consumer, so you're gonna get over-indexing sales on health and wellness type products. So you can't get too carried away. But if there's good signals, you smashing it on a rate of sale basis compared to the next brand. Go in there, speak to the store managers. How's that brand performing? How's that one performing? How are we performing? Right, we're selling 2.5 times what they are. Or what's your benchmark? Oh, so MOJU's best selling, I think for a number of, we still probably are in the chillers in those stores. We're still the best selling product by country mile. And that's despite the fact we've got wide national grocery distribution. So look for the signals. And if the signals are there, that reinforces, okay, we can be really resolute about having faith in this concept. And then it's about taking it next step into slightly wider distribution, test and learn there, put everything into understanding that consumer as well in a different, in grocery, for example, put everything that you can into launching that as a new channel, as a new customer. So it's an iterative process to get to kind of product market fit. But as I say, you've got to keep an eye on the signals, because they will be there. And that's what you're trying to get to. When you launch something, you of course expect it to be a standout success. But I think where people trip up is often the signals aren't there. And the fundamentals aren't actually there, and they think if they just keep pushing forward, if they keep launching into new customers, if they keep launching new SKUs, it'll work out somehow. But typically it doesn't. Once you find something where the signals are good and you've got the fundamentals, good rate of sale, good repeat purchase, high frequency, then you lean in hard and you double down on what you're doing.
And I suppose with challenger food and drink brands, especially when it's such a nascent concept / category like functional shots, is you've almost got to get product market fit with the consumer, but then you've almost got to get, when you're going into a grocer, like you've got to get buyer market fit in some respects, because the buyers are looking up, there's only limited shelf space. And how did you show these signals to, I don't know if you listed in Sainsbury's or Waitrose first with the shots, like how did you show those early signals and present it to a grocer to say, like, look, you need to take a punt on this and you need to give us space because this thing is going to boot off? Like, how did you do that? Because I know people who listen to this. I've got a mate who's got a boozy kombucha brand. He got the idea from his time in the USA, but it's like, how do you convince a buyer to bring something so new in? It seems really challenging.
Yeah, it just takes time. It's like any selling process. It just takes time, and also secure what data points you can. You might not be able to afford data, but for us, data has been massive from quite early on, and it's something we invested in from quite early on. You don't necessarily need to if you're in a more established category, for example. Potentially, you can kind of get away with more desk research stuff, but in terms of actual data, we were investing quite heavily in data from quite early on because we had to be able to clearly articulate the data story. But then on top of that, it is the story. Data's only a part of the equation when it comes to a buyer, and people, and it just takes time. We're even at a stage now, we're not, we've got pretty much full grocer distribution now. Got one customer outstanding, but that's a work in progress, and that will happen. It's just a matter of time, and there tends to be, because it's adoption of new categories and adoption of new concepts takes time, and there's certain retailers who are much more, well, one, geared up, but also their proposition is built more around that. So Waitrose is a great example of that. They launch concepts earlier in their life stage. They're really good at working. We've worked, they've been a brilliant partner with us. We've worked with them to basically grow the category, and alongside them, they've got an own label product, and we worked alongside them essentially to build the shots category. And it's been super successful for both members of that partnership. So it's a staging thing, and I don't think there's any, like anything, there's no silver bullet, but you're absolutely right in that it's been as much about telling that story to the customer, the buyer, as it has the consumer. And it can be a really challenging one with the customers, obviously, because it takes time, as I mentioned, to really get the message across in the way that you want to, and also be able for them to kind of catch on and say, okay, yeah, I can see there's something happening here. And only now, 7 years in, the story is becoming so compelling that it's a bit of a no-brainer, but it wasn't always that way.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think it's for anyone listening to this, I think people get so caught up on like the one buyers meeting where everything's just going to suddenly kind of manifest from that 1 hour. And I think if anyone has got a new concept or a new brand, even just sending even if it's just small data touch points, even if it's like once every couple of weeks, just to kind of just keep them in the loop, the buyer in the story through the data. And as you said, I think it'll be so reassuring for listeners because it took you guys 7 years and you're only now kind of really, booming off. So I think that's brilliant. I love what you said there, kind of about building with Waitrose and the evergreen relationships. And yeah. I suppose a question is, what have been like the one or two unforeseen challenges that you just didn't expect within building functional shots?
But one thing I would say, Dan, I'm just on that last point, because I think it's also worth saying that it doesn't all rely on grocery partners either and grocery distribution. So we actually built our business off the back of one, we've always had online, albeit it was small up until a couple of years ago. The pandemic really drove us to elevate our online offering and D2C and Amazon. But before that, we've always had online, but we also built the business through basically specialty coffee shops. So when a concept's early, nascent, you go to where the early adopters are, right? And for us, that was specialty coffee, and we actually built a pretty decent sized business just through specialty coffee alone. So you don't have to worry about, to your point, you've got that one, it's that one shot with the buyer at Waitrose, and you're pushing all your chips into that. And actually what you could do is just say, it's going to be a bit of a journey there, because we know we've got distribution in. It could be it could be that you're building through D2C in a more focused way, then you're going to go retail, which the majority of businesses end up doing, or you go into something like specialty coffee and build it through that and really focus on that. So you can actually build up some inertia. And alongside that, you're talking to Waitrose, you're taking them on their journey. It's not like you're going in there pitching hard on that first hour, to your point. It's that 1 hour, and it's either we get it now or it's never going to happen, because it just doesn't work like that. So there's always opportunity to take a different approach. Again, think differently about channel. And it's as much about channel product fit as well, without wanting to overuse that concept. But it's also, there's loads of opportunity out there in terms of channel. I'm sure you've seen it play out with Money Life. I'm sure you've seen it play out with some other brands that have been really smart on where they've distributed the product.
So it's so interesting. So with specialty coffee, you're referencing stores, right? Stores, is that like the partner you built through Store Supply?
Store Supply, yeah, they're a great partner in that realm.
So weirdly, it's kind of what you've said there about growing with your partner. I remember being on the road with Soph in Brighton back in like 2017, and they were a team of 3 back then. I think it was Tom and Hugh, and then they've now grown. And then seeing them, back in September at the coffee festival, it's unreal to see how much those guys have scaled. But we've almost had the other issue, done the different way around. So we were trying to build in specialty, but there wasn't. Now it's only now coming to fruition. There wasn't product market fit by channel, because people like, mate, we want to spend money on coffee or shots. Like peanut butter's not a thing. Like they're used to just having Skippy. So it's taken us literally just constantly, just time, basically being patient, and it kind of comes to fruition. And actually what you talked then about not having to just put all your eggs in the grocery basket, I want to talk to you about D2C, because I told I've got like a Hungry WhatsApp group, said you were coming on, and they've asked some questions about D2C, because I think it can circumvent the shackles of the supermarket shelf. So kind of for listeners, what would you say are the 1 to 3 most important steps to take in the first 6 months to kind of build a moving / healthy D2C offering?
There are, I would say there's definitely some constraints. Some things products work well through D2C, and some just fundamentally won't. So one is being realistic about your product, and whether you think there's an audience there, or whether the supply chain logistics parts of it almost make it non-viable to do. It can be very expensive. Essentially, we're a cold chain product, so our product has to stay chilled throughout the entire journey. And when you balance that against if you've got a cold chain product but your average order value is 80 quid, then you can probably, you can make it work. But so there's one there, just being realistic. Is your product, a high repeat purchase? Is there value in your product being delivered because on a subscription basis, because it replenishes without someone having to think about it, right? And that all of the classic stuff, but just be realistic about that. And then obviously you've got a bunch of different platforms now, obviously Shopify being the most prominent, but it's not too challenging to build a shop. So it's establishing, you want to establish product market fit, and that's what D2C is so effective at doing, is you can reach an audience, particularly if you're into a category where there's already significant demand. You can obviously target people quite quickly through paid advertising, but you can also find them, as I said, because if there's existing demand there. So, but it's a great product market fit tool, really, because you've obviously got a much closer relationship with the consumer. So it's about being realistic as to what it represents as a channel for you. So by that I mean, is it a revenue generation channel, or are you actually using it? Do you want it to just kind of wash its face, and then but it's being used as a marketing tool, as a brand awareness tool, as the ability to get product to people and test product in market and get feedback on it and improve it? Being realistic about what it represents for you. Because if there is no chance of it ever being profitable, then it has to do a very good job at the marketing part, because otherwise what's the reason for doing it? Does that make sense?
Complete sense.
So that's
Just
a couple of things.
conscious of your time, mate. How long have you got?
Probably got another 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so these sort of lose time on these things. But what you said about what I'm gaining from this conversation with you, Rich, is what's been so central to MOJU is what you said there, is what it represents to you. So it's being clear on what do you want your business to look like in next year's, because that will demand the kind of investment. D2C, I think for listeners, asking that question of like, what does it mean to you, and almost looking internally is super, super powerful. What I want to talk about now is your engineering background. And you said earlier, which I thought was brilliant, is, you know, it's been a roller coaster ride. We protect the team from the pain and the hard bits. And I thought that was brilliant. What have been the hardest bits on your journey, and how do you engineer resilience and optimism through those hardships?
It's interesting, actually. I'd certainly say we try and protect as much as we possibly can, but again, like any decent parent, life still is hard at times. So I wouldn't say we do a completely a complete job at that. So the pandemic was a really good example. It galvanized the team even more, but going through it at the time, it was really tough. Everyone was living their own mini nightmare, really, weren't they, in terms of their home situation, suddenly having to work from home. A lot of the people in the team, if you're living in a shared flat, you're probably working at the dinner table with your mate alongside you for 6 months or something, and got quite overbearing in many ways. And there was people getting ill, within your family, and the stresses and strains of that. So it was a very challenging time for everyone, and continues to be in some respects. But in terms of, we tried to, and again, we learned loads through that. I actually think the last couple of years, and I've mentioned this I think I was having a chat with our chairman the other day, but I was saying this generation of business leaders and equally people who, because I'm a massive believer in it, you've got the founders, but then it's the teams that make it's the teams and the founders that make stuff happen. So it's the business leaders, and it's this generation of people in work who've had to go through that. As I said, it's like a accelerated learning. It's like hot housing, and I believe this generation is going to be exceptional because we've had to go through a lot. You've had to almost deal with a lot that a lot of business leaders would not have to in their entire lifetime. People have had to, I know other businesses that have had to sadly make lots of people redundant and go through that process, and that's all really taxing stuff, from an emotional perspective, how you deal with it, in a really humane way, and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's actually, I'm really excited to see what this generation does in the future, because we've had to, as I say, adapt to a really tough situation. That all said, how do we engineer resilience and optimism? So one of our values is feed the mojo. So right. It's which is about spreading optimism. So I think as a high performing, one of the major personality traits of high performing people and teams. Again, I don't talk about high performing in the context of like elite athletes. I'm talking about it in the context of people in your life, and we all know them, and Dan, you're one because you demonstrate it, and there are people in your life who are broadly pretty optimistic, and it's one of the key character traits is remaining optimistic in the most challenging of situations. And I believe a lot of that comes through working with people, alongside people who are that way inclined. And that can be almost infectious in itself, in the same way that people who are almost the opposite can really bring down the vibe of something, or really bring down the energy. Equally, people who remain optimistic. So that's something that we just had to do over the last couple of years. But optimism, what's great about optimism as well, I believe, is that it's not like a blind faith. It's not like positivity where you can just kind of be positive, but there's a pragmatism to being optimistic as well. So, and I think that's really, really important. So talking about it again, what does Feed the Mojo represent for us? How do you, and talking about it really, and how does that play out and manifest? And then walking the walk. So as leadership, being there for people, demonstrating resilience in ourselves, being really consistent with how we are. It kind of speaks more broad beyond this, but I think Charlie and I, where we built, and I certainly comes from sort of my old man, in the way that he sort of led his life, and he was just very consistent, amazingly consistent. You knew where you were with him all the time. It wasn't like he was up and down, and he was just very consistent with how he treated people. He was very fair, and that's something that we certainly demonstrate here, I believe. I think the team would say so, but we're just very consistent, and we've done that because we've been very clear about building a life for ourselves outside of MOJU. We're very lucky to have amazing families of our own that we're building as well, and that was very important to us, to build the family alongside building a business. And that's given us this stable platform to just to turn up and be very consistently there for the team. And that kind of resilience gets born out of that stability, I think.
I love it because looking in, it's almost like you've had this engineering process kind of background, but you've engineered this almost everything, the great products, the team, and through these processes, you've created creativity, resilience, optimism. I love that, how you've kind of, not purposely building families alongside the other kid, MOJU, but it's really, really interesting. Look, conscious of your time, mate. So just a couple of final questions to wrap up that I ask most guests. So everyone says, Charlie Bigham's, Jimmy, James Averdeek from Goo interviewed him the other day. Everyone says going from 0 to 1 million retail sales is like, that is the pain in the arse, like the ball ache, the hard bit. And I'd love for you to speak to that. Like, if you were to go on that journey again with MOJU, what would you do differently and why? And I suppose most people listening to this are on that journey right now. So it'd be anything you could speak to on that would be amazing.
Yeah, I think it's that 1 million threshold. I call it a threshold because typically it's where you've probably established that you've got product market fit. Now, it might be that product market fit is in quite a niche. So then that's why taking it from one beyond is so challenging, because you can build £1 million business in a very niche, and niche brands can be big, don't get me wrong, but you can build it within a very niche audience and demographic of consumer. So taking it beyond that's incredibly different. It's a whole different skill set, really, to what you need to get it to 1 million. But 1 million is, and again, it's what you want. It's what you want as well. So some people, you could have £1 million business that is highly profitable, high margin product, and that for people, that's success, and that's totally cool with me. It's like whatever represents success for you. It might be that you're running £1 million business that you're incredibly happy running. So that's what life's about, really, isn't it? Success for me is about being happy. So it's quite an easy metric to test yourself by as well. You say, am I happy? Yes or no. It's quite if you're not, then you need to probably root cause what it is that's driving unhappiness. So, but without going off too much off track, to get to $1 million, I wouldn't say it'd be hard to say we would change much, because I wouldn't be able to tell you of all those little compounding details, which is what makes something brilliant. It's all the detail, and all of those little bits compound up, that aggregate up into what is the business today. I wouldn't be able to tell you precisely what made the difference and what didn't.
So maybe a better
precisely.
question would be, what advice would you give to someone on that journey? Maybe not do differently. I'd probably phrase that slightly wrong, but like, what advice would you say to them?
I could have probably answered it for you, Dan, really. It was not, I don't think it was the question, it was the issue there. It was more that I was saying it would be easy to look back and say we wouldn't do this and we wouldn't do that. But again, the naivety in the moment is powerful, because it probably gets you doing things that could have actually made the difference. We could have turned up to a music festival because of a few people that interacted with us there, who then went and told people, about the brand, or introduced us to someone, or a buyer heard about us because their friend went to a festival. We don't know whether that happened or not. So, but it'd be easy to say, no, we shouldn't have done so many of these, or we shouldn't have gone here. So that's more of a broader point. But advice to people is establish, as I said, look for the signals, establish what's there, be really honest with yourself and be really aware as much as possible, be willing to take feedback, but at the same time, remain resolute about what you're trying to build. And then just put the work in. I'm don't sign up at all to kind of hustle culture or anything like that, because I think that's got it's kind of been adopted by, the social media, in terms of social media, and kind of promoted heavily on social media. But actually, nothing replaces hard work when it comes to getting to that first million. And if anyone thinks, or anyone says that you can get there without a lot of hard work and persistence, then they've either had an incredibly fortunate, lucky journey, or they're just not, frankly, being as honest as they could be about the journey, because it does just take hard work, graft to get there. So as I said, look for the signals and then just head down, be really analytical around, as analytical as you can be. To your point you made earlier, is what is this doing for the business? What's this going to do for us longer term? Is kind of question those as much as possible, but also just get on and do stuff, because if you don't, you can be held back by your own indecision. I think that was your question.
No, mate, no, that was unreal, mate, unreal. And I think I've absolutely loved this conversation. I think the main thing I've got from you is this ability to look inwardly and ask yourself, as a listener or a founder, the hard questions like, what do I actually want? Like, ignoring all the bullshit of like other juice brands, what they're doing, or raising this amount of money, or just asking themselves the hard questions. I think listeners should go away and essentially do something with that. But then once you've asked those hard questions, is reverse engineering it back, which again is something that once you kind of have that 10-year map, whatever it is, it makes it much easier to not get swayed left or right with potential distractions or decisions. Yeah, mate, that was unreal. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. It's been a real, very different from stuff I've done before in this regard. So very well led by yourself, mate. So thank you very much, and always a pleasure to catch up. As I said, I feel quite cathartic. I'll go away from my session with the Pope and, into the week, and into hopefully a bit of sunshine as well, mate, which is good.
Mate, wicked. Well, have a lovely day. I'm just going to hit pause now.